Welcome to episode 3 of 7 Wrangling. So this week I thought I'd try something different where I would just run through videos that I've recorded over the last probably 3 to 4 weeks of when the chassis went together for the last time. This is after the floor panels had been installed and I'd completed the brake and fuel lines. So as you can see here, differential going in. This is made quite a bit easier by having that gantry crane, which I put together well before this man lab was actually built. It was part of the construction equipment I used to actually build the space. So with the diff installed, that had been prepared by me over the preceding 12 months. I had it welded up by a good friend who's a welder with the stifting plates on the side. So here you can see me attaching the lifting mechanism onto the engine and gearbox. I bought this for this installation. I'd never had one of these before, but it turned out to be really good after I'd made some adjustments to it. So the beauty of these is they allow you to balance the engine and rotate the engine in a manner that allows you to fit it much more easily. When I said that it worked well after I'd made some modifications, whilst this was a fairly reputable brand, it still came with absolutely no grease in any of the sliders. So it worked well for the first couple of times and then started knotting up. So if you buy one of these, I thoroughly recommend pulling it apart and making sure there's plenty of grease in certainly the thrust, in around the thrust areas on that main screw along the top, and some of the other locations as well. It'll make life a lot more easier for you. As you can see here, I'm just positioning the engine, getting the right spot. Now with that gantry, whilst it works really well, it is barely high enough for me to be able to get the engine in, clear the sump. So I have to put the chassis and the hoist right down as low as it can possibly go and then sneak it in. It is very close. And those blue gym mats have done a lot of work now. They work really well at just keeping all the surfaces from touching each other and hopefully keeping paint where it's supposed to be. So engine goes back in, level it up and then just drop it little bit by little bit, feed it into the tunnel little bit by little bit down, and now just making sure that the rear gearbox mount goes on and that that was the rubber isolator and that the gearbox slides back into that mount. So that open yoke arrangement that MK put on those rear gearbox mounts, or just the gearbox mounts, they work really well. I've had this engine in and out quite a few times now and it's getting much easier for me. I hope that this time is the last time that it'll have to come out for a long time. But it actually goes in relatively well. I do need to take off the right hand engine mount to fit it in. That's quite okay. That's only 3 bolts. That's mainly so it'll clear the new diagonal bar in that top plane that I had added in for the chassis modifications that I did on this car. Now with the engine in, positioned, sitting on its mounts, it's time to lift the engine up and off the gantry crane. So on top of my build platform on the hoist, I've got these bits of 35 by 70 with some carpet on top, front and rear, just to hold the chassis up and give me a little bit of clearance underneath. It just makes life a little easier with some access underneath. So here we are, pretty much in, just removing this lifting cradle now, 2 bolts at the back of the engine on the gearbox, and the one at the front just hangs off the standard Mazda mount. Now with the engine and gearbox in, it's time to refit the suspension, starting with the rear right. This is the first time I've actually fitted it up with the grease in there. I knew that it was coming apart in the previous time, so just to avoid the mess, I just fitted it up dry, and it wasn't moving anyway, so there was no issues with wear. Using rubber grease as recommended by MK. These drive shafts I prepared about 12 months ago once I got all the bits, so they've been painted and checked over, and then just had the bags put on them just to protect them from getting any sort of corrosion on them. I was happy to see that those drive shafts slotted straight in, a little bit of grease on the splines, and they went straight in. Really happy about that. You can see when I attach those, as I'm just doing up that yellow strap now, just to save sort of having to wrestle all of this together whilst I was getting the drive shaft fitted properly. Those little adjustable straps that you can buy at most hardware shops, probably even supermarkets these days, worked in really well for just taking the weight of the suspension. As you can see there in this shot, just took it over the top of the roll bar mount. Now just tightening up the suspension bolts, upper and lower, just getting them started, and then tensioning them up. With most of these bolts, there's a right way and a wrong way to insert them. Once you've got that back panel in, there really is only one way that they can go in, otherwise you'd never get them out again. The outboard ones, really no issue with those. And for the final time, installing these dummy struts that I was required to make, so that when I was doing the chassis testing, that I could apply the loads which went in through the wheel hubs directly into the chassis, so there's no give there at all. Happily, they've now served their purpose and sitting on the shelf, ready for the next person that if they ever have to do this. Hopefully the modifications that I've made to this chassis for Australian builders will stick for other people that want to do the same thing. Some of these can be a little fiddly to get in, but for the most part all of these suspension components just went on really well. I think the jigs that MK used to make these parts are pretty accurate. There was only just the top wishbone on the left hand side, as we see it there, was the only one that I had a few slight issues with. I just needed to put some threaded rod between the inboard mounts and just pull them together a little bit so they fitted in there. But that was really the only issue out of all 8 wishbones that I had. And when I say issue, it was fixed in about 5 minutes. It was really quite straightforward. I've had this suspension on and off this car quite a number of times now during all the chassis testing and then strengthening that I had to do, so I never really bothered pulling it apart. I just undid the 4 bolts for the upper and lower wishbones, and then so I could remove it quite easily and store it in one armful just on the ground. Once again, the trusty strap, this time a blue one, just helps hold the suspension up in the right spot. And when you put the front suspension together, Sean goes into detail on the MK videos quite often. There's a sort of a right way of putting these, in this case the dummy struts, but the real struts in, so that you've got access to the bolts. There's a wrong way, you just won't be able to get the bolts in. As you can see there, you pretty much start from the outboard end of the suspension and work your way through, finishing up with the lower shock mount was the way that I found of putting these together. And again, you see those dummy struts that I've got in the front suspension, so that when I load this chassis up with the beam and torsional test rig, that those loads get put directly into the chassis as they would be, as the suspension would apply it, normal loads. So this is the steering rack go in. You might notice something slightly different there, which is those black wedges that have lifted the rack up effectively about 20 millimeters or so, 25 millimeters. That was with some testing that I did. I found a bump steer location for the steering rack that I preferred. Just installing the NCMX5 steering column that is similar but different to the NB steering column. It's shorter in the top end, and in a moment when this zooms in you'll see the bracket that I made to adapt it to the standard lower mount that MK have got for the NB steering column. There we go, right there. And it just picks up with those two silver socketed cap screws you can see there in the shot, picks up on the bottom pivots of the NCMX5 steering column, which actually is a tilt adjustable, as you can see me just adjusting it there. So finally we got to the point where all the suspension's back on, and I got further with the build than I had in all the previous times through the assembling it to do chassis testing, pulling it all apart, making modifications to the chassis, putting it all back together again, testing it again, and then pulling it apart again so then I could paint it and fit the floor panels, and then finally reassembling it. So it was awesome to actually finally get these brakes on and also the springs and dampers, which look terrific. So there's no video footage of me putting these calipers on the basis that I generally just hate single piston calipers, and it's not a pleasurable experience for me or the calipers. Anyway, they're on now. These will do fine. As you can see, they're painted in Porsche Golf Orange, which is the contrasting colour scheme to the Porsche Golf Blue, and there'll be bits of that throughout the car. These will work fine for a long time. As you know, Neil said to me when I was speccing the car, these are more than ample for the car, because the car is, you know, about half the weight of what it ever was designed to be. So these brakes have got loads of performance. They're just heavy, and at some point in the future I'll probably end up replacing them with the nice 4-pot ones that MK do, which will go on there really, really well, but I don't need them right now. That's a future fun project to do. So that pretty much sums up episode 3. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. Next time we'll be looking more at how I arrived at fitting that engine in at that particular location, given my build's a little bit different. That wasn't so straightforward. As you can see behind me too, there's also other things that are happening with this build. It's continuing. I'm putting out these videos as and when I can. I've got newfound respect for anyone that's produced YouTube videos in the past. It's a lot of effort and huge amount of time goes into putting these together. So for MK Sports Cars, Home Built by Jeff, Tools and Track, Throttle Grotto, Superfast Matt, Bad Obsession Motorsport, I'm sure there's others. I now have a full appreciation for the amount of effort you guys put in, so thank you. Until next time, thanks for watching.